distillers are asking if we can have a honey spirit in the next honey show. So goodness knows how we're going to judge that one.
Lay it down.
Oh, it's lovely.
So what is mead? It's basically the fermentation of honey and water by yeast. And it's one of the oldest known alcoholic beverages. It comes from time immemorial, a bit of honey, a bit of fruit in some water in a pond, and it's the natural yeast will start to ferment. So early meads had uncontrolled fermentation. So the yeasts that were in the air, or actually in the honey, used to multiply and make an alcoholic spirit. But because they were uncontrolled, they didn't taste very nice. So that the monks and whoever was making it used to throw in herbs and spices to make it taste a bit better. And that is what we call methadone. So it's mead with herbs and spices. So you need to control the fermentation, and there are really two ways of doing this. One is a hot method, where you destroy the natural yeasts in the honey by pasteurising the honey, and a cold method, which is using a chemical sterilisation to kill the yeasts. Now you can still make mead with natural yeasts. There's at least 2 or 3 meaderies I went to one in Canada after Montreal, where they have a process of using natural yeasts, but it's a very controlled process, and it's not something that we as amateurs would be able to do. So the two methods, first of all, let's go. So the fermentation process is that the yeast turns the sugar in the solution into alcohol. And this is a process that's done in an air with no air in the system. However, you do need air to get the yeast started. So you need to introduce air into the mixture by shaking it or bubbling air through it to at least get the yeast started. And once it's started, carbon dioxide is given off, then you fit an airlock into the system, and it keeps air out of the fermenting vessel, and it also stops any wild yeasts going in there, or vinegar flies that are naturally around in the air, spoiling the mead. So if those of you who don't know, please kindly brought these bits along. An airlock is one of these things where you put a solution in here. It can just be water, but it's usually water with a sterilising solution in, and the air bubbles through here, and it bubbles through the water. So carbon dioxide can come out, but nothing can go in. There is quite a market, actually, in Honey Said I've got vinegar there, for honey vinegar. And again, it's a class we have in London at the Honey Show, is for honey vinegar. And it's quite popular to turn your nice sorrel mead into a vinegar and sell that. And it's popular in the UK because we can't legally sell alcohol unless you have an alcohol licence to do so. So if you've got quite a nice mead, you can turn it into vinegar and you can sell that. So what equipment do you need? You need a demijohn or a bucket of some sort to do your fermentation in, and label it. It's rather important. So I don't know how many demijohns I have got sat around in my kitchen, and I haven't a clue what's in them. You need an airlock, as I've just shown you, in a bung. You need a hydrometer, and I'll show you how to use one of those in a moment. A bucket. And a bucket's useful for when you're making a mead with fruit in it, so you've got a lot of pulp and bulk from the fruit. Jugs, cleaning bottle, brushes. In one of the companies in the UK sells these things called miracle bowls, and they're basically small stainless steel balls or copper balls that you can put in, and you swirl around the balls into the vessel, and it really cleans things up really well. So they're useful for doing the necks of bottles and things. You funnel and plastic tubing. Apron. The apron's for me because I guarantee I'm going to get wet during the process. And of course you need ultimately bottles and corks. So what additives do you need? You need certain chemicals to go in there to make your mead palatable and to help the process of fermentation. So you can get Camden tablets. These are potassium metabisulfite in a tablet form that you dissolve, and it acts as a cleaning solution, sterilising solution. You can also use baby bottle washing and cleaning things, Milton, I don't know what you call it here, but there's any sort of sterilising solution to clean things out. You need a yeast and the yeast nutrient, and you need a selection of acids to give the mead some balance. So tartaric acid, which I put here what the other alternatives you can use. You could use grape juice. Citric acid you can use lemon juice. Wine tannin, which again gives it some depth and strength of flavour. You can use cold tea and malic acid. You can use some apple juice. You don't need all of these, but you just need a blend of them to give your mead some balance. So yeast, as I said earlier, that the airborne natural yeasts in the honey are not really desirable. You can't control them. You can buy liquid yeast, but that tends to be for the larger volumes, for the commercial meaderies. And you can use a dried yeast. Any of these yeasts will do: a dessert wine, champagne, a specialist mead yeast, cider yeast. Any of them will do. I tend to use a yeast that's suitable for champagne because it gets you the higher alcohol content. The main thing you need to do is to sterilise your equipment. It's quite important. The Camden tablets are metabisulfite, which release sulfur dioxide when you dissolve them. So you just crush them in water, mix them well, and rinse everything that you're going to use. When you're showing, I find that beginners tend to do very well because they're starting off with clean equipment. So they tend to actually do well to start with, and then flushed with success, they go ahead and don't clean everything as well as they did first time round. So the next batch of mead is never as good. So you need to be able to measure the specific gravity of your mixture. And you use a hydrometer to do that. The specific gravity of water is 1, and the specific gravity of alcohol is lower than 1. So you start off with your mixture of sugar and water, of yeast, of honey and water, and that's effectively a concentrated sugar solution, and that's got a fairly high specific gravity. And as the sugars in the honey are used up during the fermentation process, and it's converted into alcohol, the specific gravity will drop down. So if you have your starting specific gravity and your finishing specific gravity, you can calculate the alcohol content of your mead. And typically in mead making, a dry mead will have a specific gravity of less than 1, whereas a sweet mead will be slightly more than 1 because of the sugar content in there. And using a hydrometer, thank you. So basically what you do with a hydrometer, that it's got a scale on it for the measurement. Effectively, you're weighing the water. So you put your in there. in there, and hopefully it comes to one. And basically what you do is you measure the bottom of the meniscus. So as you're looking at water, it does have in the tube, it has a slight concave shape to it, and you measure at the bottom of that concave shape. So mead is a fairly straightforward process. You need honey, and I use about £3 for a dry mead and 4.5 to 5 for a sweet mead. You need water, 5 pints. I make my mead in a glass demijohn, which is around about an 8 pints mixture. You need your yeast, you need a mixture of acids, and some yeast nutrient, and some tannin. So making mead in the cold, what I call the cold method, which is where you kill off the yeasts using chemicals. And this is how I do it, which is slightly different perhaps to normal. I dissolve 1 pound of my honey in water and add my crushed Camden tablet, then leave that. So the Camden tablet, being a sterilising agent, will kill off the natural yeasts in the honey. Then I come back and I will add my nutrients and my acids, and then I make a yeast mixture by having some warm water, a little bit of sugar and my yeast. The warmth and the sugar in the water will activate the yeast, it will start to bubble, and then I mix the two together. And then I leave that to start to ferment. You'll notice there that I've only got 1 pound of honey, whereas I said I needed anything up to 5. So what I do is after a week I add another pound of honey, and I leave it periodically, and then after another sort of 2 to 3 weeks I add some more. So I progressively add my honey. And the reason I do that is that some yeasts don't like a very high sugar content. And you can actually kill the yeast by having a lot of sugar in there. So I add my honey progressively rather than all at once. It takes it's a bit more fussy, and you've got to remember to do it. But I find it, for me, I find it an easier way of making the mead. And just keep topping it up. And you have to leave it. You have to be patient with mead. Did I not say you have to be patient with everything you do with beekeeping? Yeah, you have to be patient with mead as well. Then it's important to rack it, and I will come on to that in a little while. Now, so when you've got your mead and it's finished its fermentation, what will happen is that the yeasts and the other bits of debris will come to the bottom of the demijohn. And it's important not to leave your mead on that mess, because it will start to impart a bit of an off flavour to it. So you need to do what we call rack it. So you need to siphon it from that vessel into another one. I'm in the process of doing it. My husband's doing a good job here. So basically we're using a tube to do the siphoning, so he'll fill the tube with the liquid and then put it into a lower demijohn. This demijohn, of course, is still being sterilised again. And as you go on, one demijohn empties and the other starts to fill, to the point that you're getting to need to tip this one a little bit so that you don't pick up the debris, and then you go right to the bottom. And then you've got a nice clean demijohn at the end of it. Patience, wait and wait. I was interested to hear Brian saying earlier that he'd actually got some mead here that was really very young but good. But it does normally take time to get a good mead. It probably needs about 18 months. Sometimes mead will throw down another deposit once you've racked it, so you might need to rack it again. and it needs to mature. When you're coming to bottle for show, only when the fermentation's completely stopped, make up some more of your sterilising solution and clean your jars. A lot of mead shows will tell you that you have to have a jar with a punt in it, and that means that there's a dent, a dimple at the bottom. I don't know why they specify that. This one hasn't got it. The only thing I can think of is that when we're judging, we do that, because, and then you see the mead, the deposits have settled right at the bottom, and if there's a dimple, it might be easier to see. I don't, but that's what they do specify. And you can filter the meat. If you're not happy with the clarity of it, you can filter it into the wine bottles. And one thing to note is to try and do this rather like filling the honey jars, to run the mead down to the side of the jar. So if you see what I've done here, is it's going straight into the jar and creating lots of bubbles and froth. That's aerating the mead, and it's not doing it any favours. So you want to try and keep the air out of it. So when you're filling the jar, filling a bottle, just run it down the side so that you're not introducing air into it. So the other types of mead, we've got melomel, which are made from fruit and flowers. These are probably the most popular, they're the most flavoursome of the meads, and are generally the nicer ones to drink. For us, we use a lot of soft fruits, blackberries, raspberries, peaches, and you can just put those, you can just squash them and put them into your mix. Some of the harder fruits, you might need to pulp them, and some of them you can use flowers. Again, you have to be a little bit careful that they are edible flowers, and also that they've got a reasonable amount of flavour. And I was talking to Brian earlier that there's one of the guys in Antigua that makes quite a lot of mead, and he makes a really lovely watermelon mead. Now, for all that's not a particularly strong flavour, it seems to be enhanced by the mead making process. You do need to sterilise the pulp to remove the natural yeasts from that. So you can use your Camden tablets again, your sterilising solution. And you do need to add something called pectolase to some of the fruits to break down the pectins that are in there. Otherwise, the mead will always stay hazy. There's not much you can do to that. And some recipes that you see have a chemical called rohamic P, not sure what it's called elsewhere, and that helps down the breakdown of any fruit pulp. So, but making fruit meads is relatively easy. You could either do your basic fermentation, rack it, and then add fruit pulp and leave it that way, or you can actually ferment using the pulp, the fruit juice as the liquid in the first place. So raspberries, for example, I'd mix a couple of pounds of honey with water, add my crushed raspberries, add my tannins and things, mix it, and then add a yeast to it. For something like this, which I'm expecting a deep, rich red, I'd use either a red wine yeast or something like port. Again, a port wine yeast will be able to give you a higher alcohol content. But don't leave it on the fruit pulp for too long. It's not going to add anything to it. The fruit juices seem to give you the flavour in the first few days. So you can strain the fruit pulp off and then keep adding your extra honey to get to where you want to. Fruit meads do tend to be sweet ones. People tend to prefer sweet meads anyway. Dry meads are an acquired taste and need to be really well matured and have a good balanced flavour. Otherwise, they're very sharp. There are lots of recipes on the internet for fruit and for spice meads. again, where you are, you know, some of the spices, your local spices might make some very nice meads. So the problems that you may encounter, one is that there's no fermentation. So if nothing's happening after you've added your yeast, give it a good shake. It does need the air to start with, and make sure you've got a warm enough room. I don't think you're going to have any problems with this. I do at home. I struggle to keep my mead at a reasonable temperature. And you can add some more yeast and yeast nutrient to see if it keep it up and running. And also, if you've got too much sugar in there, it may be stopping the fermentation, so you dilute it. That's one of the reasons I add my sugar gradually, rather than my honey gradually, rather than all at once, because too much sugar can inhibit the yeast. So I keep mine in the demijohns, in the glass vessels, possibly for years, but periodically check it. I was judging at a show a few years ago, and there was some beautiful mead, really, really nice. And the man said, oh yes, he said, I found it. It was in my cellar, I'd completely forgotten about it. It was 20 years old, but it was beautiful. It had really matured well. I suspect that's because it's in a nice cold cellar. I can't imagine that something in your temperatures is going to last well after 20 years. I think we've probably got a much shorter process than we have. So if you can store it in a cool place, and make sure the containers are full to avoid oxidation. And you can blend your mead, so you've got one that's quite sweet, but not much flavour to it, and one that's got a strong flavour but isn't sweet enough. You can blend to make the mixture that you like and prefer. And bottle when you're ready. We're looking for one that sparkles when we're judging, hopefully. If you want to sweeten, I thought my judging sheet was next. If you want to siphon your mead off your sediment, and you need to completely stop the fermentation process. So even if you think your fermentation is finished, if you're going to add sugars to sweeten it, or honey to sweeten it, you really must make sure that the fermentation truly has stopped, otherwise it'll start again. So you need to add something called potassium sorbate and the Camden tablet to completely stop the fermentation. Then you can back sweeten it. So there are some contaminants you need to be aware of. So bacteria can affect your wine, infect it, and convert the alcohol into acetic acid, which is going to make you some vinegar. And they're just opportunity organisms. They thrive in warm and unclean conditions. They may be inhibited by high alcohol, but they still seem to make a good hold. A few years ago, I made a lovely coffee mead, called Coffee Mel, and it was really nice. They won a couple of prizes at the show. But I'd left it, I don't know why, I just left the bottle, and the vinegar flies got through the vinegar. But of course, it's now made a beautiful coffee vinegar. So it's really nice on a salad. So it's not all bad.
Your beans?
Sorry?
Using beans?
Beans, yeah. Well, I ground them. Yeah, ground beans in a little. I just put them in a little sachet. Yeah, tightly. Yeah. So to prevent that is just make sure that everything's clean, and keeping everything in a good order, and making sure your airlock doesn't fly out. Wines, mead like any wine, can oxidise if it's exposed to air, and again it'll turn into an acetic acid. It'll be quite sharp and unpleasant. A little bit won't affect it, but if it continues to be exposed to air, you really won't have anything. You may as well just throw it away. When we're judging mead, We look at a few things. We look at the appearance. So is the jar full? Is the bottle full? Is it a nice colour? Is it clear? And you saw me swirling this one, and it came up with some bits in the bottom. So again, I'd be looking at it with my torch, and you can see that it's gone. Not clear in clarity, so that would mark it down on the scoring sheets. Can I try some of the others? So this one's nice and bright. So that one's nice and clear. So that would score much more highly than that one, for example, when we're judging. We'd also be looking to make sure that, again, some rules state how much headspace there should be in the bottle. That's why it's important to always look at the rules and regulations for a honey show. So again, a honey show in London specifies that the top of the liquid must be about half a centimetre from the cork. So a judge will look at that. They won't throw it out, but it will say, you're not being as careful as you could be.
Could that sediment then be caused by how that flavouring was macerated?
It could be, but it could be just the yeasts still. Sometimes the sediment that's formed keeps coming and keeps coming. It just, no matter how many times you rack it, you end up with some more coming down, particularly if it gets cold, which again is our problem, it's more than yours. But if I've got a bottle of mead that's as clear as that, and I put it in my car to transport it to a show, and it's cold, the sediment can come down just in that short time. We'd be also looking to see, again, how sticky the jar is. This one's quite sticky, so you'd say, again, they're not taking as much care over the presentation of their product as they could do. So that's what we're looking as far as appearance is concerned. Usually it's up to 12 points. Usually it's perhaps not that many, it depends which scoring sheets. Many shows have got their own scoring sheets that they like you to use. So often appearance is not a particularly high ranking score. So you might only be ranking out of 8. And so you sort of, with these 3, you'd sort of say that one's perhaps 8. That one, because it was sticky, maybe 6, and that one, because it's all cloudy, maybe 4. So you'd score it like that. The next thing we'd look at is the aroma. So we're looking at whether you can smell the alcohol, whether the flavours that you're expecting to have, does it smell like sorrel, does it smell like watermelon? And it gives you a good idea of what you're expecting. And often, homemade meads are quite unpleasant to smell, I have to say. That it's not necessarily, judging mead's not necessarily the best part of judging. Then we're looking at the flavour. So again, like wine, we would pour a small amount into a jar, into a glass, we'd swirl it around, smell it again, and just have a look at whether what we call legs, is that there? Mm-hmm. The legs. So if a wine has got, or a mead has got a lot of alcohol, when you swirl it round, there's some little droplets come down where the alcohol started to sort of condense. So you judge the alcohol content in that way. You obviously taste it, sip it, swill it around in your mouth a little. There's an interesting thing about smelling a mead, is that if you've swirled it round in your glass, you smell it twice. You smell it at the bottom of the glass, and then you smell it at the top of the glass. And the honey aromas tend to come to the top of the glass, whereas the fruity aromas are at the bottom. So you can have 2 smells of your mead, and it gives you a good indication of A, can you pick up what fruit it is, and B, can you pick up the honey notes as well? Because after all, it is a honey wine that we're tasting, so we're looking for the honey to be there as well as the fruit. Then you're basically tasting it. Is it a nice flavour? Has it a lingering flavour? Is it acidic at the back. So these are all of the finish and the aftertaste. And then just the general impression, do I really want to drink this, or would I rather just throw it down the drain? So that's this general scoring process of when we're looking at meads. I think it finished. Oh no. So, in summary, use a good quality mead for making mead. What you put in it is what you get out of it. Good quality honey. Good quality honey. Thank you very much. Good quality honey. Some people say that they use honey that's starting to ferment, and some others say that they use, after they've washed their extractor or something, they'll use the drainings from that. I tend to find that putting a good quality honey in at the beginning means you're getting a good quality product out the other end. And be patient, it needs time to mature. And make sure you rack it well, and that the mead isn't sitting on the debris, the lees is what it's called, for a long time. You can use a wine filter. There are specific products called wine filters, so you can use one of those prior to bottling it. And make sure that the bottle that you use is clean, and it is clean inside and out when you're presenting it for show. Thank you. This is me done. Thank you, everybody.